Welcome back to Beyond the Battlefield, where we explore the battles leaders fight not only in boardrooms, organizations, or industries, but inside their own minds. And today's conversation begins with a question. What happens when leadership is forced to make decisions before certainty arrives? When responsibility becomes heavier than clarity? When pressure grows louder than confidence? In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna stands frozen in the middle of the battlefield. He is trained, he is capable, he is experienced, and yet he cannot move. Not because he lacks skill, but because inner noise, fear, doubt, attachment, and uncertainty begin overpowering his clarity. And that is why today's guest feels deeply relevant. Andrew Buzinsky is not someone who speaks about leadership only from theory. He has lived it. Andrew began his leadership journey in the military, where decisions had to be made under uncertainty, pressure, and limited information. He later went on to build and scale international businesses, leading teams across more than a dozen countries, helping leaders navigate growth, burnout, uncertainty, identity, and the invisible psychological pressure that leadership quietly carries. Today's conversation is not about corporate jargon. It is about the inner battlefield of leadership. How leaders freeze, how leaders grow, how identity traps us, how pressure reshapes us, and perhaps most importantly, how we continue moving forward, even when certainty never comes. So, wherever you are listening from today, whether you are leading a company, a team, a family, or simply trying to lead yourself through uncertainty, this conversation may stay with you. This is Beyond the Battlefield.
Andrew, welcome to Beyond the Battlefield, and thank you very much for joining us today. Very nice to have you with us and understand your perspective of leadership. So before we begin, I'll just give a brief. Beyond the Battlefield, we often explore how battlefield in the Bhagavad Gita was not just external, was internal, psychological. And Arjuna, who was the warrior carrying pressure, responsibility, uncertainty, consciousness all at once. You also started your leadership journey in the military, where decision can carry immediate real world consequences. And then later you move to business and organizational leadership. So what actually feels fundamentally different and what feels surprisingly similar about the pressure leaders carry in both the world, whether into battlefield or whether into the business?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast. It's an honor to talk to you today. Yeah, so I started off in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves, so it was sort of between high school and university, and I had the opportunity to go through officer training as a reserve armor officer. So I was in a armored reconnaissance regiment here where I grew up. So I spent a few years doing that, and just as a reservist, so part-time. But yeah, as I think I said to you before, that many of the lessons that I learned in leadership came from those days as a reserve armor officer. And they were really instrumental to my future success and to my understanding of people. Yeah, you raise a great point that there's quite a bit of similarities between the military and the corporate life. I guess the biggest thing is they're both results oriented. In the military, you've got an objective or a mission that you have to achieve. In the corporate world, you have goals that you've set for your business. So in both cases, they're very goal oriented. When I was in the military a long time ago, things may have changed a bit since then, but it was pretty hierarchical. So you had a boss and you had mid managers and you had people on the front lines. So I think that's probably the same still, but I think that's pretty relevant in the corporate world. Having a hierarchical structure is the same. I think that another similarity that I think a lot of people don't really understand is In the military, you have to make decisions with a limited amount of information and a limited amount of time. So when you're leading some people on the battlefield, as the commander, you have to make a decision. And I think that was a hard lesson for me. Well, I think I wrote a blog recently about that, sitting in the turret in Gagetown, New Brunswick, and the instructor that was teaching me just said, and insert swear word here, but make a bloody decision. And the idea is that, you've got to make a decision. You have to move forward. You can't just sit and endlessly wait for information to come to you. And I think that people would say, well, that's different in the corporate world. You've got information systems feeding you, and you've got people who are giving you reports. But, depending on your personality inclination, you never have enough information. If you're an analytical type, you can always need more information. And the fact of the matter is, in the corporate world, you can get really stalled out if you don't make a decision. So I draw a direct parallel between the corporate world and the military in that regard, just in the lack of information and the need to move forward. Obviously the military is a lot different than the corporate world. It's life and death. I mean, fortunately, I never had the opportunity to serve in a wartime environment. Thank goodness. But certainly that's a big distinction between the two. So the decisions you make could have a negative impact on a lot of people. And I think in thinking about the military, there's a couple of things that are really, really different about that environment versus the corporate world. And the first one is training. You don't just put on a green suit and then jump in an airplane and fly it, or jump in a tank and drive it. There's structured training to get to the point of competency. And I think some companies do that, but a lot of times they rely on your experience and university you went to give you some of that training. So I think there's a lot of that sort of missing in the corporate world. But I would say the biggest one, that the difference between the military and corporate world is the use of drills. And what I mean by that is, in the military, you practice things over and over and over again, whether that's loading and unloading your rifle or different, tactical maneuvers. Like, you practice and practice and practice. And so when the time comes, you just execute it because of the muscle memory. And, I think that's missing in the corporate world. I think there could be there's be a lot of advantage to practicing some of this and having some sort of preordained ways of dealing with things. But yeah, it's a great point. Leaders are leaders, and you have to, whether you're in the military or the corporate world, meet those objectives and move things forward. So it's a great question.
Yeah. And what you said is, which also brings to something, that uncertainty is always exists in both of them. Like you said, that you have limited information. That means that there is no certainty what will happen. Uncertainty exists there. Today in business or in leadership, I don't think the information is limited. You have everything. You have AI, you have a lot of podcasts, a lot of book, a lot of framework, multiple things is there. But I want to go further deeper into that when knowledge is available, right, leaders do not act with all of those knowledge available. And even sometimes people wait for perfection as well. I've seen into modern leadership that many leaders wait for a perfection. I'll act only when the right opportunity or right situation comes in. Correct? So what must be happening into that leader's mind? Freeze in between. He has to decide on uncertainty. What kind of situation he must be going through? I'm sure you had gone through multiple times in your life.
That's a great question. As a coach, I spend a lot of time with new clients talking about their mindset and really looking into, how their behavior is defined. And, there's lots of different frameworks around behaviors. We happen to use DISC, so using 4 quadrants, and, depending on sort of your behavioral characteristics, that can really determine how you behave in uncertain times. And I'll give you an example, being an engineer, and being around a lot of engineers, in the disc structure, they call those type of people a C. So, they're conscientious is I think the phrase, but, they're driven towards perfection and accuracy. And so that person with that behavioral style is constantly looking for more information, constantly trying to create a perfect decision or a perfect solution. The truth is, those things never exist, and perfection is the enemy of just getting things finished. So I think that your behavioral style influences how you behave in times of uncertainty. The other one is I talk a lot about fixed or growth mindset, and again, it goes back to what goes on between your two ears, right? That's driving all of our behavior. And then that fixed mindset. There's been a lot of writing about that, and the idea there is, you're a person with a fixed mindset believes that you're born with everything that you need and you're not going to get any better throughout your life. Use what you can in order to get through life. The growth mindset is different in that, you can learn and grow and do different things. And so you're not sort of bound by your original skill set. And, that fixed mindset can be a real killer for growth. And how I see that working in times of uncertainty is, if you have uncertain times and a fixed mindset, you don't think you can learn and adapt to that environment. You have to operate in an environment where you within your skill set. And I think that creates fear of any progress. So, if you happen to have a behavioral style where you need information and data and you have a fixed mindset, like you're going to be just really stationary and not make any progress. But that was the big learning for me in the turret there of that tank in whatever 1982 was. Most decisions can be undone. You can rewind it and say, listen, I made a mistake, let's do it a different way. And so that's the key, I think, is in times of uncertainty, is just actually doing something. And you're right. Like, there is more information now than there ever was in the history of the world. But I also think there's more uncertainty now than there ever was. So, it's just one of those phenomena that we're never going to have enough information to overcome the uncertainty we have.
And when you talk about growth mindset, I really like the point you said that people have a fixed mindset and maybe the behavior which is driving them to stay into that zone, that fixed mindset. And what we talk about in Beyond the Battlefield, that everyone has an equal opportunity to grow. Only thing that we don't see a right situation or right role for us. One of the things which we explore here is that is a person is into a right role fit based on his nature. Everyone will have a different nature, different way of looking at the world, and their inner self is not aligned with his outer role. Many time, anytime you have to take a call around that as well, even though your inner self is not ready, but you are into that role and you have to execute those things into that role. And that remind me one of the things which you said last time, that in one situation you step into where payroll was due within few days and there was no cash. Correct. Yeah. So in that moment, what was exactly happening to you internally? It was fear, focus, some instinct, responsibility, or entirely something else was there inside?
So that's a great question. Well, I'll give you a little bit of context around that situation. I had just, graduated a couple of years before from business school with the MBA, and then, went on to earn my accounting designation. And I was really trying to prepare myself to step into a role of being a president of a business and growing a company. And this was really the first opportunity I had. And it was probably 2 years after graduation where I had this opportunity. I've always sort of, or I guess for the previous 10 years, really wanted to, be running a company. And so here was my chance. I just happened to one that was, as you say, like a dumpster fire. Everything was not working very well. And, just around my personal mindset, everybody has little mixture of fixed and growth mindset in their throughout their lives. But I've always been one to really take on challenges and enjoy learning and growth. And so when you put all this sort of together, I was standing in that office of the CFO that morning and discovering that, by Friday we had to pay vendors and ourselves, and we had nothing in the bank account. And, by all rights, I probably should have been scared. I mean, this was my job, right? And, I have bills to pay and family to feed. And so I should have been afraid, but I wasn't for some reason. I guess I had a few things going for me that, first of all, that belief in myself that whatever the challenge was, that, I could figure it out. And I don't mean that to sound arrogant, but, I had a team of people there. So, amongst everybody in that organization, whether that's accounting people or bill collectors or, or marketing people, like amongst the team, we're going to figure it out. And so I had that confidence that, collectively we could come up with a solution. And we did. It all worked out and the company eventually was successful. But yeah, it could have been a debilitating moment where I just sat there motionless. But thank goodness I wasn't.
I'd also seen that under this situation, many leaders bring the responsibility and rise from that, but many crumble around that because fear and a lot of things going on that. I'll tell you that in Bhagavad Gita as well, Krishna, who is the mentor, brings back Arjuna from fear multiple times, repeatedly. Because Arjun was the one who was the skilled warrior, wanted to run away from the fight. And this mentor has decided that in any case, I will not let you leave. But we do not have those kind of mentor everywhere. So we have to fight our war, our own. And how do we bring that clarity and responsibility? You explain your story on that, correct? And that also brings me to the next thing which we talked last time, that you have scaled your organization from 12 million to 90 million. Now, from outside, everyone who looks at the growth of any organization, not this one, but any organization, it looks like, operational. They must have done right strategy. There must be a system that executed well, because once you win the war, everyone will ask, but the one who is fighting the war, he knows that what kind of tactic and things he has gone throughout that war. So on Beyond the Battlefield as well, we explore how this growth also changes your inner state of a leader. It's not scaling an organization, but your inner state has been changed a lot. So what has evolved inside you personally when you lead to this next level of your organization?
That was it was a remarkable time in my life for sure, and thankfully I had the opportunity to do that. I think the success I had was in large part due to the team I had around me. I had some really, really smart and ambitious people that, shared my vision of growth. And, in a situation like that, we actually went from, 12 million to around 120 million in 5 or 6 years. So it was quite a story, but you have to get a lot right. You have to get more right than you got wrong. And for sure, the team was that was the best part that I had, is having a strong team that challenged my thinking and pushed back on things that they didn't think were good and shared the same ambitions for growth. Well, that was really important. And of course, you have to be, in the right industry. You have to have the right product that meets the market, and the timing has to be perfect, and all of that stuff has to be good. But, I guess, your question was back to how did that change me? And, I really am a driver in terms of my personality, like pushing, and I set high expectations for myself, which, often result in disappointment. And, like all of us have those two guys, one on their left shoulder and one on your right shoulder. And, the one on the left tells you what a smart and amazing person you are. And the one on the right says what an idiot you are. The one on the left doesn't seem to talk very much, unfortunately. But yeah, no, I guess what changed about me after that whole process was just a realization for how important relationships are, in terms of not even just relationships with your team. That is very important, but relationships with customers, that customers have to trust you in order to buy from you. So that's really important. And then your family as well. I was on an airplane, probably 60% of the time. It was traveling a couple 100,000 air miles per year. So, you have to have strong relationship with your family and to be able to survive that sort of abuse, right? But the relationships after that, after I left that company, I thought, that was really the strength that brought it all together. Aside from strategy and the rest of that stuff, is the relationships that I had and improved on during the course of that period. And some of them didn't improve, and that's just the way it works.
I can deeply resonate what you said about relationship. And when it comes to customer relationship, I'm living this life today as well. I've been to sales and marketing for years now. Today, the relationship has been just a transactional. While the real customer relationship, it's not only a business discussion. The relationship of customer is how you help your customer, how you understand their pain point. You talked about your team, your family, but I see customer is also part of your family, and that's where the relationship, everything gets built in. And to understand that, that's what I can see a transition happen into yourself and into many people like you and me, where you understand that the customer is not a milking cow. A customer is someone who is creating something unique for the society, producing something unique for the society, and we are just contributing into that business. And that's where the relationships start building. But when we move forward and when we are into growth mode, we and in Beyond the Battlefield, we discuss a deepest idea, which is mentioned in Gita, that a confusion start beginning into your identity. When your identity start attaching with the role, you are a CEO, you are an owner of a company or an outcome. This is done by me. This is what I have brought in. I have made that, right? So even in this Arjuna's, the warrior's confusion, also we explored here, and he considered he was himself as one of the best warrior, but at the same time he was attached himself with multiple things, right? With his family, with the result, with his personality, with the validation people will carry for him. If he win, what will happen? If he lose, what will happen? And that was behind his mind. He was not knowing, but those things were building in his mind. And today also many leaders unconsciously build this identity around performance, success. So, in your leadership journey, have identity both strength and eventually a trap? How does it has shown up, or how does in modern leadership this identity become your strength and sometimes your trap as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That was part of the journey that I went on in the company that I built. Was, essentially I was the first person in that business, and we added by acquisition and by hiring and growth. We sold it to an American company, and I realized that I would have, a couple years before they put their own person into that role. And, I knew that day was coming, but when that day came, I went into this really deep depression because I had identified that company as me, because I had sort of built it. It took me a long while to sort of break out of that and just realize that it's a piece of work that I've done, no different than a document that I've made and so on. So, stop identifying yourself with that organization. So I think that's a challenge with executives, is getting sort of that emotional attachment to their work and, getting too involved with that, on a deep mental basis. But I think, there's a risk with identifying yourself with something in particular, like a company. And, again, to that sort of fixed versus growth mentality. If you think that, your success was based on, your identity that you have today, then the risk is that you never change. You think that I have to be that same person always, and I can't grow. It's almost like the athlete that goes through a certain routine before their game. They have a coffee or water and walk 3 times around a bench, whatever their little thing is, for whatever reason that was successful for them in the past. I think really what success is growth and change and being able to adapt. And I think that, getting too uh, identifying yourself as, who you are as the key to the success is really dangerous, because that can lead you into that sort of fixed mindset that I've been successful, so therefore I don't change. And I think I've heard many people like Aaron Rodriguez, the baseball player, say there's only two modes. There's growth and there's decline. There's nothing in the middle. Yeah, sort of leaving yourself as a status quo and identifying yourself as your current state. That's super dangerous, I feel like.
So when we need to define growth today growth is all external validation, correct? But you had experience growth is not now you will agree that growth is not only external validation. Growth is something which we as an individual also grow, right? Many times we don't get result, but the action what we have done has shaped our behavior, our mental state, our inner state as well. And one of the central teaching in Gita is acting fully without becoming psychologically attached or to control every outcome. Because in any situation we do not have control on the outcome. Whatever we do, what control we have is on our action. Right now what I can control is what I have. And that's where my learning is. My growth will happen on the action what I am doing today. My action is more effective. But what we do today is when we act, we keep goal in mind that I have to reach there. Right? Now, and this is a leadership culture today. People are trained like that to control everything. Right? Whatever you do, you control. Your outcome should be in control. So what does it actually take for a leader to act decisively while accepting that many variables will remain outside their control, and still he has to act decisively?
Yeah, that's another great question. Again, I sort of go back to the mindset of the executive, thinking about, whether you're a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Like if I think with a growth mindset, you accept that there's certain things that are outside of your control, right? That you've done what you can to impart your desire or your goals or set your objectives. But, at some point there's things that have to change. And, it's like the old saying, the fact that you have a plan is not the important part. It's the fact that you've gone through the planning process and thinking through what's going to happen. That's really the strength in it. I think the whole mindset is really being adaptable to outcomes that you may not necessarily see coming down the road. Being able to sort of pivot as you go, and not assume. I mean, everybody assumes that everything's going to go great, but how many times does it actually do that, right? In your career, how many times have you put a plan in place and it goes into a different direction? So, right?
So I have a very simple metaphor for this. So what I say is that when river has to start from a hill, does river make a plan which route she is going to take? And think about a situation, river has made a plan and someone has put a building in between, what will happen? So when river flows, it flows in a very fluid, very, very smooth way. If there is an hill, it will drop down. If there is a hurdle in between, it will take other route and move. Right? So rightly you said that you make a plan, but how many plans are getting executed in a way we thought of? We reach there and in between. And another example I was giving today. So I said that when you go back to home from an office, right, and there is a pitch dark on the road, how much you can see? Only 10 feet, the headlight of your car. When you move forward, the clarity will keep coming. But if you say that all of the traffic signals should be green, only then I'll keep my car out of the garage. It's not going to happen. You have to move the car, reach to a signal, decide it is red or green. If it is red, take another turn. So you're right that you plan something, but plan is still required. You need to set a goal, right? You need to set a goal that I need to go back home, or I need to move somewhere, right? And then on the way you have a different route. So this remind me two things which you have talked about, that when you are into military, you have to decide, you have to take accountability. And in business leadership also, there are responsibility which ultimately rest only on one person. Correct? Someone has to take a call. So in Bhagavad Gita as well, Arjun was looking for validation from Krishna. So that when a later sometime asked, why did he left the war? he can fall back on him. And Krishna will keep reminding Arjuna to not to escape from the responsibility, even it feels very heavy. So in from your learning, I just want to understand that what does true accountability feel like when there is nobody else left to fall back on? You have experience of military, you have experience of business.
That's great. No, it's a heavy responsibility, even if it's not, sort of life and death like you are in a battlefield environment. You still, in a corporate world, you still have the responsibility of the success of the business, helping to pay families and, allowing them to have a home and food and a nice lifestyle. And so when it's not successful, I feel the burden of that, I personally, I personally have done something wrong. And, I guess that's a sort of a danger of that role, is that, good leaders will attribute any success to the team, and any failures you take it on personally. And that's a hard burden to carry, but that's leadership,
Yeah,
and
correct.
that's the job that you've signed up to do. And I think, a lot of people don't understand how encompassing that role can be. Like, there's a lot of people that complain about, well, CEOs make so much money that, they get so much more pay than the average worker and so on. And maybe that's not fair, but, I sort of look at that, if you're running a large corporation or organization, it's not just you come in at 8 o'clock and you leave at 5. Like, there's always a concern on your brain about something in the organization or a person, a personal problem, and so on. And it just doesn't leave you. As a story I told you, even after I had left the organization, I was still troubled with things that went on. So, it's an immense toll, mentally and physically. For me, I was traveling a lot to countries that, we had operations in. It's hard to exercise when you're traveling all the time, and you put on some weight, and just sort of the mental strain of making sure that, your employees, that the company's doing well, and therefore the employees are doing well. So, that, in my mind, that's what accountability is taking that burden on and passing along the congratulations. And, I just would say to people who think that's unfair, that's what you signed up for as a leader.
You said two important things. One is when you are a leader, you are carrying the weight of the organization, of the people. You are not working for yourself. You have responsibility of those hundreds of people and their family on your shoulder. That's a big responsibility. And you other thing you talked about, that CEO are paid high, but they are on 24/7. It's a responsibility they are carrying, that one wrong move can take organization from one level to other level. And in Beyond the Battlefield, we often discuss how a real battlefield is internal noise, fear, overthinking, self-doubt, emotional, a lot of turbulence come in your mind, right? That is what the leader, and we as a leader, in a very, even we are leader of a family, all of those things will go through in a smaller level or larger level. I don't say that only CEO or managers are leader. Every individual is a leader leading their life, and every individual is going through all of those situations, right? So even very highly experienced leader talk about mental noise becoming louder under pressure situation. So where does this inner noise actually come from, and why does the pressure amplifies it so strongly that people get freeze and they become helpless to decide? They are experienced but they don't decide because of this.
I feel like that the inner negative dialogue is really a byproduct of that leadership desire. It's almost like an internal feedback loop that tries to keep, your brain working properly. I remember a few years ago, I was watching this documentary about Frank Gehry. So Frank Gehry he just died a couple of years ago, but he was one of the most famous architects in the world. Studied at MIT and developed some of the world's most beautiful buildings. And they were interviewing him about there's a beautiful museum in Bilbao, Spain. And so he designed that building, and he talked about, when they came to him and asked him about building that museum, he said, why would they ask me? I'm just this Frank Gehry. And I thought, wow, if this guy can have self-doubts, then, everybody should, right?
Right.
But but I think it's that's the driver that keeps your brain thinking and trying to be better. Like it's that blessing and a curse thing, right? That you're always driving for perfection and trying to get things done, but you have to put up with that inner dialogue. That's the engine that keeps it going. And so you can't stop, right? Like just can't stop. And I think it's that leadership style or behavior that drives you to keep going forward, regardless of, what your brain is telling you. And, when I was in that role, I did not have a coach. And, I've become a coach since then and realized the benefits of having someone to talk to that can separate those thoughts, which are actually just stories you tell yourself, separating those from the facts. And, I think that's the important thing, is to stop and say, okay, guy at left shoulder, you're saying a lot of stuff, but it's just stories. What are the facts here? And then, move forward on that. And that's really easy to say when you're sitting here talking to a nice guy like you. But, when you're sitting alone or sitting on an airplane and you've had a failure, it's really hard to get over. I would say that's the value of coaching, is helping leaders get sort of past that.
Yeah, and other thing which just pop up in my mind when you're talking about this subject. Many times, what happens, we see that, and this is a real story. I'll tell you. Today, I was talking to someone about what I'm doing with Beyond the Battlefield. He was not aware I'm doing this for a year now, and he said that one of the dilemma I am in always, and that mental noise has created. I need to send a mail to someone, but every time I need to send a mail, right, I'm clear that I need to shoot out this mail, but I don't send. And the reason he was saying that, what that other person will think. That's a mental noise, one of the mental noise of validation, whether he will like or not. So 5,000 years ago, someone was not able to fight because of those validation. Today, we are not able to send an email to someone. We are not shooting arrows to each other. We are just sending an email to someone. And that mental noise comes up because your brain keep on thinking multiple things. Your mind keep on thinking. It has the thoughts which comes up in a microsecond, in a second, thousands of thoughts will pass through in your mind. And that is how we are trained. I know that in a very pressure situation, whatever learning we have will go away. I keep on telling people an example that if you are staying in a high-rise building and you are late into the office, you will go to the elevator, push a button. Within few seconds, you will push again because you are into hurry. Your intelligence is gone. You are an engineer. You know that the elevator is come with one button, one press. Is going to come, but you keep on because your IQ has gone down because the emotion has taken over there. And in Gita, suffering is offer connect, and we discuss that not just to action, but your inner attachment and that mental agitation around that. Today, many leaders describe this as a burnout. But for your experiences, is burnout really about work overload, which people do? Or there is something deeper happening psychologically inside leaders?
Yeah, no, that's a great question also. I see a lot of leaders who are burnt out because of overwork, for sure. And the classic example is somebody technical, like us, and you put into a leadership role, and because you're the person who everybody comes to for the answers, in order to get more work done, you put in more hours or you work more, take on more projects. And really, that's not a sustainable model. What that person has to do is transition to thinking like a leader and delegating work to other people and working through them rather than, doing the work themselves. So I do see that a lot, and in all kinds of, not just technical roles, but like plumbers and electricians, like even sort of tradespeople that are really good at something, they just can't sort of delegate that. And so that happens a lot for burnout. But as you pointed out, there's a sort of mental aspect as well, is if you're in a leadership role, you carry this responsibility of the organization, and you have this, self-doubts and inner monologue going on. And I should have done this, and my people think this of me. And it's a lot. And so you have to have the mental discipline to, sort out the stories that you're telling yourself from what are the facts, and start listening and acting on the facts. But that mental battlefield, as you say, that could be a burnout in itself. You could be working 20 hours a week, but still, have this inner emotional, tug of war between you and your brain that creates some burnout. But I would say a lot of it comes from what we do to ourselves. I mean, how many times have you seen people just be harder on themselves than they are to their own family or friends?
And one of the things which connect now with what you said rightly, that leaders, when there's a burnout, the thing which we explore and what we learn from Gita is that it is about their attachment to outcome. I can't fail. I need to be successful, right? Because I'm a leader, I have done this thing multiple times. I can't fail now. I have to be successful. And then we also explore, and we have seen that many times when this burnout happens, because you are attached to the outcome, they take a step back. They try to renounce that action. They try to step back from that role, right? Saying that I'm not capable or I don't want to do that. Let someone else take up. That maybe solve the problem of that organization at that time. But as an individual, as a leader, you have not solved yourself, because you have not left that I can't fail. I need to be successful. That's a very subtle ego sitting inside you, which you have lost that opportunity to get away from that ego, and the burnout will there, that will stay in your mind, that what we say, and that when you reappear into different role, the similar situation will come and it will amplify that burnout. That decision story will amplify n number of times, and it will be more difficult, which we talk about right now. Another thing which I want to touch upon is your current role, where you work very closely with leaders who are transiting from high performer to becoming actual leader of people and organization, which you just talked about what leader is, right? But today we see a lot of challenge, and that's where people like you there who are helping them. But why this transition is so difficult? If someone is very high performer, very skillful, why he can't become a good leader?
If you've seen other technical people in engineering transition into that leadership role and be absolutely terrible at it. And I've worked for a couple of people like that in my career as well. And, I think there's a few things going on. People like us are, rely on ourselves, like we think we don't need anybody else. And, it's your skill, your training to do things, and you become successful. And so that success reinforces that thinking that, you're the best person to do it, or you're the only person that can do it in that certain way. And so that's what's driving your success. And, with repeated use, with repeated success, that mindset gets baked into your brain, and then you get put into the leadership role. And what's your immediate reaction is, now I've got 20 people and they do something else, I'm just going to work harder and keep doing it. And it's that feeling like nobody's going to do it as good as me. It's going to take me longer to teach them than it is to do the task. Like all of those thoughts are wrong when you get into a leader's role. And how I work with technical experts into the leadership roles is understanding that, your output is no longer judged from you. Your output is what comes out of your entire team. So if you're doing the work yourself, you have failed as a leader. Excuse me. You fail to really use the team that you have. And, part of one of my beliefs is diversity of thinking. Cognitive diversity is extremely powerful, and there's lots of examples and research been done about how cognitively diverse teams outperform, experts. And so as a leader, if you're not taking the advantage of those different backgrounds and experiences and educations and even cultural backgrounds, you failed to make the best solution out of whatever the challenge was. So there's a lot of challenges in moving from a technical expert to a leader. A significant amount of my practice is actually helping people make that jump. And so because I've done that myself, I've been able to create programs to help people do that. But it's difficult.
You are
In
right.
many cases, you're overcoming 20, 30 years of learned behavior and a way of thinking that's made them successful. There's the old book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And that really describes going from a
Right.
technical expert to a leader.
Yeah. And so this aspect we cover in a way that we identify human nature, inner nature. Where does he sit? And based on that, we define that where do I take him to the next. So, like you said, that engineer who is technical, you bring him to the leadership where there is a decision on the bigger aspect. As an engineer, we have taken a lot of decision. But when you comes to a leadership, it's not a kind of decision which you will take into your machine and your automation and other application. So we talk about human nature and we categorize into four different classes of human. Someone who is more labor oriented, someone who is more business oriented, someone who is more aggressive or a fight or a leadership oriented, and someone is more intellectual. And based on that, we understand that what are the gaps over there, whether he's fit into that role or not, and what he has to do from move one role to other role, and we go into the whole human nature, how the composition of the body is, what kind of good thing he is having, what he has to eat, what he doesn't have to eat, what kind of nature he has to adopt. Because someone who is a warrior, like you say, engineer, can't become a CEO next day because he has to be calm. He can't be aggressive when he's CEO. So how do you change your mind from aggression to calm and take a right decision over there? So one thing which also we talk about where you're talking about success, one thing we also talk about ego. How ego quietly distort perceptions, your own perception, without knowing even without we realizing it. And in business, especially when there is a success, there is rapid growth, many of the leaders gain that confidence, influence, authority, right? So how does ego slowly begin influencing your decisions? You talked about culture and the leadership behavior. Often without leader note, they don't notice themselves that this decision is not mine. It is something which is built on me very politely, very subtle way into me, and the decision has come up.
I think everybody has some ego in them. Obviously, you're proud of your accomplishments and you have a self view that you're a certain type of person, whether that's, like you say, a warrior or an intellectual or a business orientation. And I think I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but I think ego is extremely important to your success. But where I think that impacts things negatively is when ego grows to the point of arrogance. And, I believe arrogance is that view that I'm the smartest and I'm the best and only I can do it and everybody else is inferior. And I've seen this time after time in organizations where the CEO and leader is become arrogant because of success. And for me, that was my biggest fear in leadership is getting arrogant. And I see the spiral in arrogance is that you begin to think that you're infallible. And so you stop listening to the people around you. And so the whole advantage of having a cognitive diverse team is getting those different perspectives. You stop listening to them. So then you stop understanding what's actually happening in your organization and you become disconnected from reality. So you say one thing about this is how the organization works, but in actual fact, it's nothing even close to that. And I've seen that time after time after time where executives, especially where they have a headquarter office that's in a different city, they say, oh yeah, this is the way the company works. And you know what? It doesn't. And that's really dangerous. And I think that's the cycle that scares me. Leadership is that ego going to arrogance, going to disconnection from reality. So yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah, and that's where we have seen that the decisions looks like logical for that leader, but because those previous behaviors, those patterns have decided that. Now we are very engaging discussion, but we are limited time. But one thing I want to ask before we sign off today is you had been experienced from military leadership into crisis situation. You have been into scaling organization, how executive pressure and reinvention, multiple things you're gone through, right? Now, when you strip away your everything like strategy, matrix, execution, title, what does leadership ultimately came down so far for you?
Well, it's all about caring for the people, and that was my first lesson in the military, is as an officer leading people, everything that you did was to support them. And as an Army officer, I went to bed last, I ate last, I got up first, made sure that the people that worked for me had everything that they needed to be successful, including that personal connection with them. How is your family doing, and how is your health doing? And so in my career, I've had a great career and continue to have a great career, but it's because of the people around me that have made me successful, not so much me. So I think at the end of the day, it's all about people and the relationships you have with them. We talked earlier about family and relationships. My company's called Rodina Ventures, and Rodina is a Ukrainian word meaning family. I really believe in, my customers and my partners being a family, a business family. And now, Ankur, you're, in my business family as well. So that's what I believe in.
And now I will answer the question what I asked to you. What has changed into you? And that's what you say right now. It's not I, it's we. And the metaphor which I use for myself for the learning is, if you have your own arrogance and ego, the I will keep on increasing higher and higher, right? And it's not useful. But if you tilt the I horizontal, it can become a bridge. And when it is a bridge, it can connect the biggest problem. The way I define is the problem is distance between expectation and reality is a problem. The bigger the expectation and the reality, bigger the problem is. And you talked about people. That's what the true leadership is. It's all about we. It's not an individual who can execute anything anywhere in the world, right? And that's where the successful leader look at that people, that team, success of those people. Andrew, thanks a lot for giving such an insight of your journey, and it really resonated with what we talk into Beyond the Battlefield on a psychological and philosophical way. But we really want to apply in a real life, and we bring out a lot of examples. But when people like you come and join us and share your journey, it is really, really important for our listeners and everyone to know that how practically actually these things apply into this world. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Ankur. It's been a pleasure, and all the best with your podcast.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Sometimes the biggest insight from a conversation is not a strategy. It is a realization. A realization that leadership is not about controlling every outcome. It is about continuing to move forward, even when certainty does not exist. Today, Andrew reminded us that pressure is not the exception in leadership. It is the environment. And the real question is not, will uncertainty come? The real question is, how will we respond when it does? We spoke about burnout, fear, perfectionism, identity, and the silent emotional weight leaders carry while everyone around them only sees the results. But perhaps the deepest lesson from today's conversation was this: leadership is never only about performance. It is about people. The people we serve, the people we protect, the people who trust us, and the people we become through the process. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does not promise Arjuna a life without uncertainty. He teaches him how to remain steady inside uncertainty. And maybe that is the real evolution of leadership. Not becoming fearless, but becoming capable of acting even while fear exists. To Andrew, thank you for bringing such honesty, wisdom, and grounded perspective into this conversation. And to all our listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or see your own battlefield a little more clearly, then share this episode with someone who may need it. Like, subscribe, and follow Beyond the Battlefield on your favorite podcast platform. And you can always write to us at beyondthebattlefield@outlook.in. And don't forget to check the Beyond the Battlefield companion GPT link in the description, where you can continue exploring leadership, Bhagavad Gita, and the deeper psychology behind human decision-making. Until next time, remember, the battlefield is rarely outside. It is almost always within.